exactly where you've been online. His eyes were there. He saw it. And he's in every place. Have you gotten comfortable with a private vice on your phone, your tablet, your computer, or even with social media? The eyes of the Lord are in every place, beholding the good and the evil. And there's no wiggle room. He knows you better than you know yourself. He knows how many hairs are upon your head. Not a big a deal for some of us as it is for others. But you know what the point is? God knows you intimately. And that omniscient God that knows you. And by the way, there are some in this room, you cannot imagine mercy from a God who knows everything. But God is better at forgiveness than your shame lets you believe. And He is a better Savior than you will ever be a sinner. He is a better Father than you'll ever be a prodigal. And He can wash you and He can clean you. He's got some great plans for you. But having laid that foundation established about His own character, would you now look how He describes these people in the first century church of Ephesus? Would you look at verse 2? He explicitly states this characteristic of omniscience in verse 2. I know thy works and thy labor. The word labor, look how he describes these people in the first century church of Ephesus. The word labor there is the Greek word to toil to the point of perspiration. To the work to the point where you don't have any energy left and you are physically exhausted. You know what? If you're a Christian in the first century church of Ephesus, number one, you'd be serving. You'd be serving. You say, preacher, that sounds like a commendable thing, and it is. But it's all part of the camouflage. It'll make sense in just a minute. But if you're a Christian in the first century church of Ephesus at this time, you would be there every time they had services. You'd be there every time they had soul winning. You'd be there every time there was anything going on at church. You would be there serving, working, laboring to the point of exhaustion. Number one, they were serving. But number two, would you look back at verse 2? I know thy works and thy labor and thy patience. For those of you that are students of the New Testament, you know that this word patience carries the idea of endurance. They were serving, but number two, they were steadfast in persecution. And you just read 2 Timothy and the letter. I just preached that this past week. In the letter that Paul wrote to Timothy, there was a character in crisis. Paul was incarcerated in the Mamertine prison. There were people ashamed of the Lord. They're ashamed of Paul, and they're ashamed of the gospel. And there was just heavy persecution. Paul was beheaded in the streets of Rome, AD 66, AD 67. This is a little bit later now in Revelation chapter 2. But I'll tell you, there was an extreme persecution. We don't have a clue what real persecution is about in our country. Yet. I think if the Lord tarries, and who knows how long that's going to be, I think if the Lord tarries, it's going to cost us to be a Christian in this country. Yeah, then we'll find out who's committed and who's not. But they were steadfast in persecution. Again, commendable. They were serving. Look back at verse 2. And how thou canst not bear the they were separating. So there were false apostles rolling into Ephesus saying, I've seen the risen Lord. I have a word from Christ. And so they thirdly, they would separate from the world. They didn't want the world influencing their families. They were separating. They were separating teachers as these false apostles would come in. They were possibly separating from disobedient brethren. Would you look at verse 6? But it is the deeds of the Nicolaitans, which I also hate. Notice God said He didn't hate the Nicolaitans. He hated what they did.